Thank you. Now we'll have time for some more questions. Jot any questions you'd like to ask, because we're going to have all three speakers up here. And also, we would appreciate you filling out an evaluation before you leave today. But at the moment, we have a new component of this efficiency conference. Dr. Bullock suggested we do this year. We got a couple of speakers who are going to talk about what we heard today. Dr. Lim Cooler, we're going to turn it over to you for that.
I'll go ahead and get us started while our other person gets up here and gives you the producer perspective. But what I heard, let's see, Novel in to Fight Fescue is a good tool for our fescue-based systems, and we don't have to do the entire farm. We can start incrementally. Heart scores, we don't have to do the PAP scores necessarily, but we can start collecting heart score data, and we may see a relationship of that coming into our fescue due to the vasoconstriction. And so Dr. Poore alluded to that a little bit. So I think that's another key concept for us to keep in the back of our mind. Environmental stewardship. We know that rotational grazing, managed grazing is also part of the climate smart ag recommendations that are out there, and all of us can do that. And we've got a good base here within our CS staff that can help develop grazing plans, as well as county agents can help you with those things. So we've got tools that are out here that we all need to be thinking about tapping into. I had a whole list of other ones, but I want to save time for questions and also give you the opportunity to come on up and share a little bit with us.
I don't know how I found myself in this situation or how I got called up here, but as to give you an idea of my operation, I'm just a commercial cow-calf operator. I finish out some of my own calves, so this is coming from my perspective. We've just recently started in the recent years developing rotationally grazing on our pastures, and I was very astounded by the PAP scores on how relative that is to a lot of other different issues we actually see on the farm today. And it's something that I'm going to be looking for in the future for my bulls for sure, and some of the replacement heifers that I'm going to be hopefully buying in the future. But what really, like the takeaway for me is how all of this is so related. All three of these speakers, and from the PAP scoring, going into how we can rotate our cows around and develop our pastures in a different way, is I'm going to be looking at, for me, the 25% renovation. That is affordable for me anyways, because I couldn't, when Max Q came around, they wanted us to redo all of them at once. But the 25%, and you see that increase in there. And if I'm picking the right genetics for the EPDs, for the PAPs in the future, that's going to affect my entire herd to be more efficient on those rotationally grazing pastures that I'm developing on my place. And has anyone in here ever heard of U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef? Raise your hand if you have. Very few of us. I was fortunate enough when they first started to get together. I think it was the second annual meeting they had. I was up on a panel with you all and was very educated in it. These guys are on our team, no matter what sector in the cattle industry you are. Become a member of it, because they're doing the things that they're speaking in the ways that we talk, especially we're cow-calf state. They are helping us have that communication to point out we've been becoming more sustainable every year. We didn't call it sustainability, we called it best management practices. And they are communicating that with our consumers. So that's kind of the takeaways that I had, and there's a lot more stuff that I'm sure all of you all are taking away from these three excellent speakers we've had here today. Thank you all.
Okay, now we're ready for questions. We got a couple microphones to move about here. Anyone in there, when I was teaching, I always said there are no dumb questions. If you don't understand something, don't feel badly. Someone said a while ago, hate to ask that question. Don't hate to ask any question. If it's on your mind, you'd like to have an answer from one of these outstanding speakers, let us hear it.
Kind of two questions, but they're kind of related. So, has there been any research or testing on if gentle cattle or the disposition, is that tied to the PAP score at all? Or has there been anything that's done testing about that? And then we talked about the lung capacity. It was one of the first things you talked about. Can we select for larger lung capacity to combat these issues? Like, I'm thinking ahead, like what's been done now that we have some of this information?
So for your first question regarding the relationship between temperament and PAP, docility. I don't know that we've ever looked at that. And I don't know that anyone had, the trouble you end up with is, so just from a research facility, right, where all of these PAP EPDs have generated from, this is a very, how do you say it, docile herd. I mean, they're worked right. They are. You could let your grandkids go wander around in the tub and not have any issues associated with that. So, I don't think that that's something we've ever looked at. We don't collect docility or any temperament data because we really don't have any problems. So that answer is I don't know. I truly don't know what that might be. With regard to the lung capacity, that's something that I've kind of floated around, and you've kind of touched on something. And every time I bring this up with, fellow meat scientists and everything, they kind of like they kind of mumble around it. But if you just look at things like dressing percentage and grid price, we're paid to produce saleable product, right? And sort of paid to have minimal waste, and of which lungs are. So, I don't know if there is an indirect relationship with, cattle are getting larger, yet lung sizes are really sort of remaining the same just because of that. You look at yield grades, dressing percentage, whatever those metrics might be. I suspect, though, that, and I'm going out on a limb here, and I suspect that if that might not be the case, we might not see as many of the issues that we are currently seeing. If we would allow, if, like I said, if we were to not have that selection and sort of let those cattle grow more, I guess, naturally, unselected, if that's the proper term, with regard to the waste associated with harvesting them. If you select for it, I'm sure it would work. I mean, I'm sure you can, right? But are you going to be able to? Yeah, I don't know.
Let me add something right here, right quick. Allison, your question is very good. Scott just told us yesterday that they're looking at the Angus database to look at the correlation between hair score and PAP. While you're at that, might be a good idea to stick docility in there too, and just get an answer to that question. That would kind of be interesting, because Angus database has all three of those.
Yeah, that is correct. Yes.
So, Dr. Jones, just follow up real quick, Scott. See what you think. In a way, selecting for PAP, you may be indirectly selecting for larger lungs by selecting.
And I would say if we were selecting for PAP, that might be the case. But PAP is one of those. Our grads, and some of the issues our grad students get up and they talk about, we're selecting, we can decrease PAP by this much and this much. The issue is, though, typically with PAP is we're not selecting for lower PAP. We're using it to identify those few individuals that will not make suitable parents for progeny that are going to be produced at elevation. I would agree, if you would select for lower and lower, that might be the case. But what we're really doing with that is we're trying, okay, we can't use these, we're going to focus on these. And so we're trying to lop off those extreme outliers and go that direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the heart scores that you collect, are those used in any way through genomic to calculate the EPDs, or is that simply from the PAP scoring in the chute?
The answer to that would be yes, and working towards that. So if you go back, so there's really two groups working on this heart scoring problem right now. There's the group from Simplot out of Idaho, and they have collected a significant number of heart scores, and they've come up with what is a molecular breeding value. So the molecular breeding value is just, they take all the genomics and they add all the, from all the little SNP variations, the variations in the DNA, they sum the effect of those up and they have a value. So essentially what you can do is you can take a blood sample, you send it off to them, and then you can get a prediction of that without any data or anything like that. And so where we're going is more of what a traditional genetic evaluation that you would see from like the American Angus Association, where we are developing the EPDs, but we will be using genomics to enhance that from a traditional pedigree evaluation. So that's where it is going, yes.
But in the American Angus Association, you calculate EPDs. Do they use any actual heart score data, or is that only what's collected in the chute?
And for the American Angus Association PAP, it's strictly PAP. There are no heart scores going into that evaluation.
And that genomics are included in that one.
Yes, genomics are included in that evaluation, yes.
Yes, I got a question about the fescue situation. I know for a fact I got very little endophyte-free fescue on my facility. Until I can get in the process of converting that over, what are the top 2 or 3 things that I could do to help eliminate the toxicity of my Kentucky 31?
Okay. So the number one thing that you need to do is to encourage clover, probably legumes in the system. And, we've all kind of got used to having really good herbicides and knocking out those weeds, but we do a pretty good job of getting rid of clover too. So that clover is probably the most effective. And based on what we're seeing now with red clover, I would suggest red clover probably, Kinland, we know has the compounds that give some benefits. So that's what I would say would be the first thing probably. Second would be to clip seed heads, try to prevent these animals from grazing out the seed head tops. And we know that you wouldn't think they'd eat them, but they go for them, and they're very toxic. So that causes problems later in the summer because those toxins accumulate. So those would be the first things. I also would definitely look at things that you may need to do that affects the whole system. So things like your minerals, make sure you're up to, that your mineral is up to snuff. You're using some selenium, copper, things that we know are important no matter what the production system is, but it seems to be even more important when you have fescue.
Thank you.
Okay. Have time for another. Got one back here, then we have one over here.
Real quick, you mentioned that fertilizing fescue increases toxicity. Is that the nitrogen component of the fertilizer, or is it the PK? How does that work?
That's a really good question. Mostly, it's the nitrogen is probably the main thing. We know that the big problem where you really get into troubles with things like poultry litter, where there's a lot of nitrogen and a lot of other stuff there too, and it's been sort of misinterpreted. It might have been phosphorus, but it looks like nitrogen is probably the main thing. And so part of that is when you don't put nitrogen on, then you have clovers and you have other stuff to come in and help to dilute out that stand, and it also decreases the toxin levels in the fescue as well. Again, we give up on an opportunity to boost yield a ton or more per acre in most all of our acres by sort of minimizing the use of that fertilizer.
This is more for Steve. We were talking about sustainability, and we've talked about it in committees some when we talk about sustainability. Consumers often talk about, they're concerned about welfare, they're concerned about sustainability, but they don't have a good actual true definition of it, and it typically doesn't actually influence their buying. Usually the price is actually what influences their buying. Would you say that's true or false, or do you know, or what do you have to say on that?
Good question. So Dr. Glenn Tonser at Kansas State University did a study. I might get the year wrong, around 2013, and they were doing a follow-up study to a previous one that came back and said the consumer will pay 30% more for verified beef, and they didn't think that was quite right. So they did a study that pulled the consumer, then followed the consumer across the scanner. And even though the consumer said they would pay more for beef, when she went to this meat case, she made a choice with a family budget and did not spend $30 more, chose the beef that fit their family budget. And when it comes down to it, they're all trying to put a budget together. They've got college planned for the kids and everything else. And while they might be aspirational in some aspects of it, it is a financial decision.
Someone else got a question? Right here in the front.
Steve, also for you, just talk a little bit about how diversity plays into sustainability.
How diversity?
Your farm diversity.
What we try to do, and I think you were talking about it up here, that we're trying to get a diverse composition of species of plants that extends our grazing season, so that we have a cool season, plethora of plants that are coming in the spring. Then we go through our traditional, easy to manage warm season grasses, and then another run of cool season grasses. But for us, we also like the forbs and the browse. And as odd as it sounds, I was fortunate to work with Dr. Matsushima at Colorado State University in my senior nutrition class. We did a study on the nutrition value of cholla cactus. And while it has high nutrient quality in it, it's 80% moisture. And by the time you do the dry down and move the plant and incorporate it into a feedlot ration, you're going to take thousands and thousands of acres to have to do it. However, a beef cow will self-select for cholla cactus. And so you get the benefit of that. That's just another one of those browses that they adapt themselves to, they utilize it, they have satiation points where they quit on it, then they come back to it later on. And so we're always kind of looking at that overall composition of plants that carry us through, even through the winter. Four-winged saltbush, mountain mahogany, cholla cactus. When I say we don't feed hay with 2 feet of snow, it's because we've got stuff that's that tall. It may be woody, but then everything else at that time of year is dried up and there's no green, so it's going to carry them through in a tough situation.
This is for Dr. Poore. Does your novel fescue stockpile as well as the old 31, Kentucky 31?
Yeah, great question. And yes, in fact, it does. And there's a little bit of difference between the varieties that are available now, but the more rugged ones work out just as well as Kentucky 31 for stockpiling. And the thing that I like about it is I can get on it a little earlier, so we have enough to where we stockpile some and we start grazing like in November. Those areas where we used to wait until after Christmas because we know the toxins start to drop. So now I can get started earlier, and then I can move into the toxic stuff after Christmas, and that helps to extend that grazing season. So yes, it does, and that's actually most of my research has been on that.
We appreciate these questions. They're very good. And got another one right back here.
This is for Dr. Poore as well, related to fescue. On the novel endophyte, did you see a longer growth period headed into your warmer summer months compared to Kentucky 31? Did it have a longer growing season as the temperature started to increase?
Yep. And the answer to that is no. Really, it is tall fescue, and there are some differences in maturity and that sort of thing. But right now they're not huge. They're like, maybe the seed heads come out a week later, 10 days later on some of them than others. Bar Optima is one that is a very late, and Tower is another one that's a very late header, but that means a couple of weeks after the others. The one that is most Lacefield Max Q2, which was developed here in Kentucky, is really fits this environment extremely well, and so that's one to take a good hard look at.
Another question for you. What have you found the most economical way to do seed head suppression? Sorry.
Okay, that's an excellent question. So, and I'll tell you how we do that. There's different ways to do that. One, you can clip the seed heads with a bush hog after they start coming out. By then, you're kind of out. You've let the plant kind of get in that flowering stage, and that's going to hurt the plant a little bit. You can use metsulfuron, which is chaparral is one brand of that, but Cimarron is something else. And so that particular herbicide suppresses fescue seed head production. And so I don't know if anybody in here has ever done that, but you can go out about boot stage, about middle of April, and you can pretty much eliminate about 3/4 or higher of those seed heads, and that makes it less toxic. And actually, Johnny did a project on that a few years ago, and that does confirm out. Now, the problem with that is they control clover and other stuff. So there's something to pay for that. But what that does give you also is it gives you like some horse nettle control and some other problem weeds. So if you've got some problem weeds, that may be something to think about as a one-time deal. And I'm not sure I would do that continuously. The way we do it is on most of our acreages, we turn out early and we move really fast. And now you'll hear people say, oh, don't turn out early, it'll really set you back. But if you do turn out early and move very, very fast, the first thing that pops up for us is tall fescue. And we get these, you get that boot stage pops up pretty quick. And the cows will eat it good at that point. So if you move them quickly and then move them on before they graze everything else down short and do that first rotation real quick, then that does an amazing job with suppressing the later production of those seed heads. And that's probably the one that I'd tell you to try. But don't leave them a day too long because they will, it's very sensitive at that point and it's easy to overgraze it.
We'll take one more question, and then these gentlemen will still be here. We want to keep you on schedule for the rest of the convention here, but one more good question back here.
My question's on fescue again, too. My farm in particular, long ridge tops, extremely steep on hillsides. I have converted 20, 30-acre pieces on top. The hillsides in some places are too steep some people might not know, but it's too steep to turn a tractor over trying to clip it. Can that fescue encroach back in, Kentucky 31 encroach back in my novel the way my neighbor's poison hemlock does in I battle, but I can see it. I can't see the fescue.
Okay, that's kind of the magic question, right? If I'm going to do this and 3 years later the toxic's back, I'm not doing it. And now I totally understand that. What we have done in our research is to let these fields seed out so that there is that constant pressure from the adjacent pastures. And we have not seen that happen. So that has not happened. There's a few little things that you need to think about. Number one is where you feed hay. If you have toxic seed in hay and you unroll it on those novel fields, you're essentially where they damage the soil, damage the stand, then there will be toxic seed that will come. So that's the one thing that you have to avoid. Other than that, it's going to stay pretty clean. There is some concern about moving from areas that have mature seed that the cows are eating into those novel fields. So that's something to think about as well. Whether that actually is a problem or not has really not been proven. It's theoretically could be a problem. But what's different about novel than Indophyte free is that Indophyte free kind of died back and left a lot of bare ground, a lot of open opportunity for the toxic stuff to come in. The novel is that very, very dense sod, very competitive, and it really keeps new seedlings from developing. And so where you may find them is like around a mineral feeder, places where you've really done a lot of damage. You've got to be careful about that. But we, again, our evidence right now is that is probably not going to come back with you if you follow a few little common sense rules with it.
We would appreciate your filling out an evaluation here and making any suggestions you'd like for our conference next year. I want to mention one more time, Dr. Bullock will be disappointed if I didn't do this, but the Beef Improvement Symposium is in Knoxville, Tennessee, June 10, 11, and 12. And this is a symposium where we not only have researchers presenting highly scientific information we like to hear, But we also, it's a meeting where we have extension workers, we have seed stock producers, and we really want to have a lot of commercial producers, and we have the interaction among those groups. So it's the one meeting that we all go to that we enjoy the camaraderie of that entire group of people. So all of you would be invited to attend that convention. If for just one day, you can attend the whole thing, and it is 3 days, 10, 11, and 12. Anything else we need to cover?
Just one thing, if you want to fill out the survey, you can use the Scan Me QR code up here. If you need Wi-Fi access, just hop on and join the free Wi-Fi access, because we know a lot of cell service is not very good in the building here. And we have more paper copies that we can bring around.
Anybody needs a paper copy, Becky will get that to you real quick. Once again, we thank you for attending. We appreciate any suggestions you might have for future meetings. You've been a great audience. The way you've been engaged is just fantastic, and we thank you for that attention.